In this video, I'm going to show you how you can group dates in a pivot table. So it's going to be useful when you're doing analysis, when you're looking at a large range of data and you want to break it down into chunks, whether it's months, years, quarters, or days. So I've got date, name, vendor, and amount fields here. So I'm going to convert this into a pivot table, insert pivot table, and I'm just going to put it on the same worksheet here. And I'm going to select date. And when I do that, you'll notice Excel automatically groups it by year for me. So I could open this up and see a breakdown by years, by quarters, by months. So we've got a whole lot of grouping that Excel's already applied for me. Now, I'm going to fix that in a second, but first I'm going to pull in the amount in the value section and the vendor going across in the columns. So now, if I want to change this grouping, there's two ways I can do that. I can right-click and select ungroup, and that's just going to get rid of any grouping, or I can just go into the group option here, and so I can uncheck this. So we can see we've got months, quarters, and years selected. So let's say I just want to break down by months. So I'm going to hit OK, and now all I see are months. So January through to December. Now, the one drawback of this, however, is my data includes values from 2023 and 2024. So this value in January is going to include both January 2023 and January 2024. To fix this, I'm going to right click, go back into group, and add years as my breakdown, my grouping. So now I've got years and months. So this one is January 2023. This one is January 2024. So anytime you're looking at a grouping by months, you'll want to consider whether you need to add years as well. If you're always going to be looking at only 1 year at a time, then you don't need to. But if your data is going to span multiple years, you'll want to group it by years as well, just to make sure you don't have that overlap and 1 month containing multiple years of data within it. I can also group this by quarters. So if I go back into grouping, and instead of months, I'm going to select quarters. Now I've got Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So I've got a different type of breakdown as well. And so you could also add months within this if you really wanted to be able to break it down, just like Excel did by default, where it had those multiple layers of grouping. Another grouping you may want to consider is days. So by default, this isn't a terribly useful breakdown unless you've got a lot of daily data in here. Like in this case, it almost looks like a table because I've got so many rows, right? So it can be fairly long. So unless you've got a lot of data in here, just breaking it down by 1 day at a time may not be helpful. But what you may want to consider is you can go back into grouping, is setting the number of days to something other than 1. For example, if we set it to 7 days, number of days is 7, now we're looking at 1 week at a time. So this captures more data within a row. We don't have as many rows, and potentially it's a bit more useful. Now, the one drawback here is you'll notice this starts from January 5th, right? So that's the first data point, the earliest data point that is in here. But I can change that. So if I right click, go into group, you'll see it's automatically starting from January 5th, automatically ending at February 21st. But I can force it to say, okay, I want you to start from January 1st, 2023. I know there's probably no data in there, and that's why it's not included in this automatically at the starting point, but I can force it just to have a sort of a cleaner starting point. So I'm going from January 1 instead of January 5. Now, anytime you go back in the grouping, this number of days selection resets back to 1. So I'm going to manually have to set this back to 7. Now I'm going to hit OK. And now you can see my grouping starts January 1 to January 7th. Then in 7-day buckets again from the 8th and the 15th. Now, if you go back into the grouping, we could also add months in here as well. It gives us more control over how the data starts. Obviously, it's not going to reset every month doing it this way, but it allows you to group it and have more control over your start and end points. Now, if we go back into the grouping, we could also break this down by hours, minutes, and seconds potentially if we had that level of detail. But if you're just looking, if you've just got dates, then the main things you're going to be looking at are either days, months, quarters, or years. And those are the main sortings that you're probably going to use in a pivot table anyways. As you can see, there's a lot of different layers you can apply. If we applied all these, you could have a pretty significant breakdown. The benefit of that is, you can do this however you want, break it down as you see fit. Now, obviously, you can expand everything in Excel. There's an option to right-click on your header here, and then expand the entire field or collapse the entire field. So if I expand it, everything opens up. If I want to break everything, collapse everything down, then go to expand and collapse entire field. So there's a bit of flexibility in how you can do this. You can even collapse it up to a certain range. Like let's say collapse to quarters, right? We could do that as well for that specific quarter, but that's essentially the same thing as pressing the button here. So a lot of different ways that you can group your dates in Excel. So whether you're looking at years, months, days, potentially weeks, or quarters, there's a lot of flexibility in how you can do this. The main thing to watch out for, though, is when you're doing it by months or quarters even, to consider having that year breakdown as well, just to make sure you're not overlapping multiple months when you're not intending to, because otherwise you can have unintended results. But that's how we can group by dates in a pivot table.